the real question then is what effect does these kinds of changes have? What's the evidence? You know, we have to think about these questions about evidence, but we have to be quite sophisticated in thinking about what would constitute the sort of evidence that we would be really interested in considering. There is a set of evidence which, you know, is obvious. You know, this, you know, everybody say, well, you know, I've got the T-shirt. Well, this is the T-shirt. And it is the case that people using these kinds of services consistently report a change, an improvement in terms of the quality of their experience. And most mental health services in most countries, one of the outputs, one of the outcomes they're searching is a better experience. And you don't have to be Einstein, you know, to work out that if you go into a service, you go onto a ward because you've become very distressed and you need to go into hospital. It's a very different experience if the person that comes up to you and sits next to you says, you know, how are you doing? And you say, well, it's terrible, I hate it here. And the person says, well, I know exactly how you feel because I was in your position 2 years ago. I know what it's like. And just, I mentioned empathy at the beginning. I think just having somebody who can say, I know what it's like, is on its own something that's going to have a big influence on the quality of people's experience. And I don't know the situation here in Norway, but at home, the experience of using acute admission wards, if you listen to what patients, service users tell you, is not a very good experience. People go onto wards, they say they can't find staff, people don't tell them anything, they don't know what this meeting is about, they don't know when they can talk to staff and when they can't talk to staff, they don't know when they're going to be discharged, if they're going to be discharged, they don't understand what the treatment is, and so on. And it seems to be difficult to get that message over. Well, if you have service users on the wards whose job it is to listen to that, to liaise with the staff, and also to help staff plan and deliver their own care better. There's very interesting work being done around what are known as joint crisis plans. I don't know if you've heard about joint crisis plans. They're a little bit like advanced directives, but the difference is that joint crisis plans are formulated with the treating team and the person and their advocate before the person is discharged. And on wards where you've got a peer support worker, they can feed in to that discharge planning. Well, you know, if anybody sees that Mrs. Smith is starting not to wear her hat, then that's the time that services need to be more vigilant. So peers can bring in information to work with staff to help improve what they do. And the evidence about joint crisis plans is actually they do reduce admissions, but what they reduce most significantly is the numbers of compulsory admissions. We have an intervention, joint crisis plans, which appear to specifically reduce sectioned admissions. And they do that simply by making the treating team more aware of how to manage crises in a more constructive way than waiting to have to use compulsory admission. Anyway, so service users say that the experience of having people around makes it a better service for them. However, a lot of the evidence we're talking about is relatively new. We're not really at a position, we think, where we're ready to do large numbers of randomized controlled trials. To do a randomized controlled trial, you need outcome measures, and we think we know what some of the outcome measures be, but you also need independent variables. You need these interventions to be very well worked out. And really, they're not that well worked out at the moment. We're just beginning to understand their power and what they can do. And actually, we think probably what we need most of all is to understand how these interventions are working, and then maybe we'll be interested in doing controlled trials. Having said that, there is some evidence, particularly about peer support workers. Julie reviewed this literature a few years ago, and there's been another review by the Cochrane collaboration, a review of randomized controlled trials. But generally, the research is very clear. There are benefits for service users in terms of them feeling more empowered. They feel more able to solve the problems in their life. They have shown improved access to work and education. They feel more hopeful, and they feel more accepting. So we think the evidence in favour of peer support workers is very strong. The remarkable thing about peer support workers, though, is that the benefits are not just for the people they're working with. There are benefits for the peer support workers too. Providing they get the right kind of training and support and that staff are prepared. Julie didn't mention that. We wouldn't just parachute peer support workers into a team. We would work with the team and with the peer support workers before the peer support workers began to work, to make sure that everybody understood what the unique contribution of the peers were, and we would provide the peers with supervision and management support, just like the other members of the team. And in that way, peers benefit also from giving the service. They feel, and you must have, you can gather I'm quite old, and I've had many people say to me over the years, I ask them, how they're feeling, and they say, well, I'm feeling a bit better now, and then I say, well, what do you feel about things looking back? And they say, well, the one thing I would like to do is I would like to help somebody else in my position. I wish I could give something back, my experience. And that's what peer support workers enables people to do. And so it transforms what we are used to thinking of as the stigma of mental illness into something that's actually very positive. It's the stigma of mental illness that qualifies the peer support worker to do their job and to be useful and helpful. And that's a profound experience we find for peer support workers. Suddenly the thing that they've been ashamed of, the thing that has adversely affected them, becomes the thing that is important and useful and can be used to help others. And finally, peer support workers also begin to change the organisation. We were talking about this over dinner last night, and we were saying that at the beginning we thought, I don't know whether you think, but we thought that if you put peer support workers into these professional environments, gradually they would absorb all the professional values and they would all turn out to be little psychologists, or little nurses or something. And what we find actually is that the opposite happens. They influence the professionals and make the professionals behave more like peers. Because what the professionals see is that the peers are there to help people very directly, tuned into their problems, and they can see that for the peers, this is a satisfying and rewarding thing to do. So they think to themselves, well, actually, I would like to do some of that. I would like to get some of that. It would make me feel better, rather than a lot of the things which I currently do, which don't give me any satisfaction and clearly don't give the people I work with any satisfaction either. So you begin to change the organisation. And the organisation, one of our recovery colleges, well, actually two of them now, one of the recovery colleges is located in the Trust's headquarters. So all the senior managers have to walk through the recovery college before they can get to their office. Now, the manager said, oh, we can't possibly do this, they'll be able to see our computers, and as if anybody would want to see the computer of the finance director. But actually, it changed the attitude of senior staff, because they saw people who they had always thought, these are poor people, we have to help them. Well, actually, yes, that's true, but actually, they're also people with great talent and ability. They're training our staff, they're helping to train service users, they're bringing the police in and they'll train them. They are valuable members of our community. So peer support workers and recovery colleges are very unusual in the sense that they benefit the people receiving the service, they benefit the people giving the service, and they benefit the organisations that they're in. And that's really rather a potent combination. Now, we're much more concerned with money than you are. I mean, Norway is a very rich country, I think, looking at the prices in the shops. Anyway, we are, like many other countries in Europe, struggling, with the effects of the financial crash. And we have a very right-wing government who has decided that the best way to pay for the incompetence of American and international bankers is to cut back on public services. Now, quite how that works, I don't know, but forgive me for making a political point. But we are short of money. We don't have any new money. And the developments that Julie was talking about, the recovery colleges, the peer support workers, haven't generally been made with new money. They've been made with using old money differently. Do you have day centres? We've had day centres for years, and most of them completely. I mean, the thing with day centres is that first of all, nobody wants to go there, but once they go there, nobody wants to leave. Now, the recovery colleges are the opposite. Everybody wants to go there, but because they choose to go there, they choose which courses they will do to help them pursue their goals. Once they've done a few courses, then they're ready to leave. So what we've had to do, what our services have had to do, they've had to close, they've had to close day centres and reopen recovery colleges. And a lot of the peer support worker posts we've created through posts being redesignated. We have quite a lot, I think rather more than you do, of untrained staff, care assistants and nursing assistants who are not trained. And I think it's true in Julie's trust and many of the trusts. Now what they're doing is when one of those posts become vacant, they say, well, can we make this post into a peer support post? Can we make it into a combined post? A care assistant who is also a peer, who receives some training and support to use their experience to help the team and so on. So the question of money is important. And so we did a little study, some colleagues and myself, with some health economists, and we looked at 6 of the trials of peer support workers where they had been specifically looking at the impact of peer support workers in terms of reducing inpatient bed use. Because I don't know a lot about health economics, but the one thing I do know is that if you can reduce inpatient bed use, you will always save money, because nothing is more expensive than inpatient bed use. So if you can reduce it, you will always save money. And so we selected 6 studies, all of which had looked at the impact of peer support workers on inpatient bed use, and the health economists calculated the cost-benefit ratios. In other words, how much money you had to spend to have peer support workers, and then how much money you would save by reduced bed use. And the answer was, on average, you save 4 times as much money in reducing bed use as you spent on providing peer support workers. Now that's an argument that our managers are really very interested in. And it's an example. We have to be careful about this, because we don't want to sell this as a service which is great because it's cheap. We want to sell it as a service which is great because it's great. If it's also less expensive than what we're doing, then it's we say it's a no-brainer, really. And we were very pleased. This report came out last year. It's by Rethink, which is a national charity dedicated to improving services for people with psychosis. And they commissioned the London School of Economics. You see the London School of Economics up on this report, to review services, to review ways of saving money in mental health services. And this was one of their conclusions. An approach which may also in time offer the biggest scope for cost savings in mental health care is to promote and expand co-production, drawing on the resources of people who are currently using mental health services, for example, in peer support roles. So we were very pleased to see that. Just one other slide, and then I'll hand back. I think I'm back on time now. I think I'm back on time. Just one slide about what we've learned here. We've learned that organisations don't change from the top down. Neither do they change from the bottom up. They change when the top and the middle and the bottom are all trying to move in the same direction. And what we've done, I think, what we've had to do is to run up and down organisations the whole time, trying to tweak the top, tweak the middle, tweak the bottom, to get organisations to move forward in that kind of slice. Services have to change from the bottom. There has to be people like yourselves who are keen, who are not satisfied with the service that you're giving and want to improve it. It doesn't matter if you don't know how, as long as you feel like that, there'll be people around who can help you improve what you're doing, and that has to be present. There needs to be some shared values. Recovery is really a set of values, and I think one of the reasons we've managed to be quite effective is that the values unite the people who provide services, professionals, the people who use services, the patients and their families. Who could be against the notion that services are there to help people live their lives in ways that are safe for them and for everybody else? And if you can get those values over, then all of a sudden the conflict between staff and patients and families starts to disappear as people start to work in the same direction together. But to do that, you have to work through the process of people exploring the values. Services have to sign up for this themselves. I said right at the beginning about local ownership. Local ownership is key. One of the reasons why policies and directives from the top don't work is that they don't create local ownership. People have to be wanting to do this themselves. We've tried to use methods for organisational change for which there is good evidence. There is really, really good evidence that, as I said, briefing papers aren't going to change anything. What's going to change things is when people become engaged in that process, continually moving around those circles. And therefore, it's a process which contains all, it's like action research. I know we've got a lot of researchers here. What I've described, managers would call it a closed audit loop. Researchers would say this is an action research cycle, where all the time the objectives are being changed in the light of experience as you go around. And that's what changes organisations. And the other thing, and we're not very good at this, we're very good at celebrating failure. If sociologists come and look at mental health services in England, one of the things that they say, is a friend of mine who did this, and he said, one of the things that really struck me was how good you are at celebrating failure, but you never celebrate success. When anything goes wrong, everybody gets together and there's a great meeting, and there's television programs and newspaper articles. But what happens when things go right? What happens? All that happens is that you talk to her when you're having coffee, and you say, "Did you hear about what happened to John? It's fantastic. He did this, he did this." But it's not celebrated in the same kind of way as we celebrate, failures. So those, I think, are some of the lessons. And Julie's just going to finish up with the very few minutes that I've given her to talk about leadership. And this is a very nice quote, I think. Supposedly Michelangelo, the greatest danger for us is not setting our aim too high and falling short, it's setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. So that's my bit done.
Do you think we should have some questions or anything, or are you all right to just keep going? Well done, okay. Lunch soon, we're nearly there. Right, I want to talk about leadership because I not only work for ImROC, which is all around externally looking into sites and helping them to recognise what they're good at and what they're not so good at and what they might improve and what they might do differently. But actually I'm within Nottingham, in fact nationally, I was the first kind of designated lead for recovery, which means I actually, I'm answerable to the chief executive of the organisation, and really my responsibility is to try to change the culture and practice of a whole service, and so, but without any managerial power. This is a leadership position. And I think now we have what we would recommend to services is that organisations do have one person who has credibility with practitioners, but is also respected by senior managers who can actually take a lead on this agenda. And this is a very different form of leadership from the traditional health service leadership, which we might recognise more as management. Traditionally, within services, the goal is to try to achieve given targets by increasing efficiency, by avoiding kind of risks, and by rewarding good performance amongst the staff. It's a transactional approach, so you do what managers ask you to do, and in return, then we reward you. And in fact, there's a very hierarchical structure where people align manage down the line, and there are very clear processes and procedures and professional role distinctions. And so you work within your role and within your profession, and that can create kind of silos, what we call silos, where, a team here is doing exciting new things, but it doesn't actually talk to this team here, and this profession develops its own way of doing person-centred care, but this profession does it a very different way. And often there's competition between these silos rather than collaboration. And the focus is always on economics. It's always on, so how does this come in within the budget, rather than on the extent to which this achieves your vision. I think it's kind of, do you have your eye on the bottom line, which is the financial line, or do you have your eye on the horizon in terms of your aspirations for your service? Now, transformational leaders, which is, at the other end of the spectrum of leaders, are actually incredibly different from transactional leaders in that these are people with a very clear vision, which they share by inspiring other people so that those other people in the organisation want that vision too. It isn't about working through processes and hierarchies. It is about recognising individual strengths. It's recognising the leaders, situated leaders at every level in every place around the organisation. And it's about empowering those people who've got those strengths to work towards your shared vision. It's absolutely about aligning the objectives and goals of the organisation all the way through. And recovery is a kind of philosophy, a kind of umbrella philosophy, which the whole organization can aspire to without excluding those kind of evidence-based therapies and approaches. You can use all of your old therapies, medications, approaches, so long as it's done in this collaborative, respectful, relational way. So if you align your teams, your individuals, your divisions, your services, your organizations towards recovery, then everybody has a role, people can use their own strengths, but you've actually got a common purpose, a common vision. It's absolutely about people, this transformational approach. It's about people, and it's about rewarding people's innovation, people's individual ideas and creativity. And it's about releasing those trapped resources. It's about finding where this person what this person brings, and how they can help to solve your particular problem in your area. And it's about sharing them between teams, between divisions, between organizations, between countries even. And it's absolutely about not looking for the answers within your own little box. It's not about inward looking. It's about trying to get ideas from diverse sources. And so, through doing that, creating a kind of overarching cultural shift. And you can see that recovery-focused leadership is very much more in line with the transformational approach than it is with the traditional transactional approach. Recovery is actually based on these transformational principles, and it's not governed by the financial goals. It's much more governed by sharing values. It's changing the way we approach things. And recovery-focused leadership is very much about modeling recovery-focused behavior. So as a recovery lead, my job is to be positive, to be hopeful, to build on people's assets and strengths, to look for solutions in the same way as I would if I was working with an individual. And it's absolutely about building relationships. It's about recognizing and embracing creativity. So when somebody comes to me and says, you know, in our long stay ward, we have somebody who's constantly talking about how much they want to have rabbits, then it's my job is to try to take away all of the barriers so that we now have 2 rabbits on that ward. You know, that's just a small example, and the funny thing is so much of this is done through very small examples. We have a wonderful dietitian who's now produced a cookbook, and this cookbook has actually been based on the favourite recipes of some of our most disabled inpatients in our high secure service. And so the people who've been in seclusion for years on end have now made their favourite meal. It's been photographed, written up, and they've talked about their memories associated with it. And that cookbook is for sale in national bookshops. But it's about taking away the barriers so that ideas can happen. And this is absolutely based on the same principles as recovery-focused practice, in that this is all about believing in everybody's potential, everybody's skill. And I didn't understand a lot of the papers that were going on, you know, when I was speaking in Norwegian. Don't speak a single word of it. But the little thing about the fish, and the fact if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, well, you know, the important thing is that everybody has some skill, some assets, some potential, and it is about recognizing that within not only the people you work with, but amongst the staff. Many of our staff now, we don't just recruit for their professional qualifications, but we recruit because they bring an interest in football, an interest in music, you know, an interest in different types of spiritual beliefs. These are as important as their professional qualifications. And just as when we're working with people, we don't tell them what they should be doing, but we offer them information so that they can make their own choices. We try to empower them. We try to mentor them. And that's what we should be doing with our staff. And building these valuing, trusting, respectful, personal relationships is as important with staff members as it is with the people who we work with. And the important thing is to place the right people in the right places. As I've gone around, we have around 10,000 staff in the organisation that I work in. And as I go around, I find absolute diamonds, people who bring something very, very special. And I try to find a way that they can spread those skills and their values and can model what they're doing. We have recovery leads in every service, and we have recovery champions in every team, and so we can kind of select people who absolutely understand this to work in those roles. And the important thing is that every team can do this in their own way. People set their own goals and are encouraged to work towards those goals in the way that suits their own environment. We try to encourage their ideas. We absolutely encourage collaboration. Action learning sets aren't just about bringing together different services. They can happen with different teams in the same organisation so that they share ideas, they stop competing and start to collaborate. And the other thing is, recovery is all about narratives. It's all about people's stories. People who we work with retell their story. They rewrite their story as one of success rather than of victimhood. And the same thing, as a recovery-focused leader, you need to tell the story. You need to create a vision that others sign up to. And we've developed a lot of tools that can help us to do this within the Trust. And one is that we have a glossy recovery strategy, which is approved by our board, who hold us to account for delivering on that strategy. But within that strategy, each of the 7 strategic goals has a whole team working on that area. And we report our success and we showcase our success. We have ImROC has its own team recovery implementation planning tool, and this is what teams can use to benchmark their success in terms of recovery-focused benchmarks, and then work out an action plan to progress over time. And that's all written up in that publication. ImROC also provides 10 top tips for practice, which makes a very useful supervision tool. So when you're talking to people about the extent to which their interactions are based on recovery, there are very specific criteria which will help us to assess the extent to which they're recovery focused. Within, if you go to the ImROC website, there's a carers health and wellbeing tool. We have access to advanced statements, crisis plans. In Nottingham, we've developed a negotiated safety plan. Within the Recovery College, people have individual learning plans, which they, as service users, hold to demonstrate to themselves how they're achieving their goals. The Staff Recovery Prospectus gives details of all of the many courses available for staff working in the organisation. And we also have staff well-being plans, just like a personal recovery plan, so that staff can make their own plan for staying well at work. So, quickly, finally, 10 top tips. As a recovery leader, you need to believe in the power of recovery, and you need to know the evidence that underpins it, so you can justify your belief in it. You need to model and embody recovery. You need to demonstrate that integrity and trustworthiness, and a willingness to give credit where it's due elsewhere. But you also have to be very flexible, respond to situations, be solution-focused, and be very willing to make the links, to build partnerships. People need time to think, so it's about creating space for people to get together and just think creatively. And yet, there is also, not everything goes. As a recovery lead, you have to demonstrate as well that some things are not acceptable and need to be dealt with. And you have to be aware of the bottom line, even though your eye's on the horizon. So don't ignore the finances, stay within the budget, check out where you are, and constantly monitor performance, measure outcome, and report on your successes. Thank you.